Hello, this is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Program Director for Communication, Media, and Ethics here at Mid-America Christian University. I am here in our B studio, right? The man cave, if you will, for our Creating Social Media Presence and Cultural Movements Week 1 Q&A, asynchronous response to our reading questions from students, looking at some readings from Week 1 as we move along in the course. And I want to respond to these as many as possible, also keeping in mind that we do a lot of video content in this course, and so we want to keep some of these videos as brief as possible, just so you have time to absorb as much as possible. Can I say the word possible a couple of more times? Possibly. All right, let's jump to some questions. Really trying to pick and choose, skim from the top, right? Taking the best questions, the best worded questions, the questions that make the most sense in a kind of asynchronous discussion fashion, or asynchronous discourse, right? We are interested in a couple of themes in this course, COM 4603. And primary among those is the art and the craft and the practicum of interviewing, all right? And so lots of questions about interviewing. We're reading Book on Interviewing by Emma Lee Potter, all right? Interviewing for Journalists, 3rd edition, as well as looking at some questions from Scott Goodson's Uprising, okay? How to Build a Brand and Change the World by Sparking Cultural Movements. Okay, we do have a third text, but we don't necessarily get into it yet. Comes later in the course. So for now, our red books. All right, let's look at some questions, starting off with John. All right, John has some questions here. Considering the legal and ethical issues concerning interviewing or interviews, looking at page 14 specifically, is this a good step to practice when speaking in general to people before conducting interviews? Had to research and speculate what this refers to, but I believe John's referencing the use of a voice recorder, all right? So that's what I picked up, at least on from investigating page 14 again. And I think the response to where does this fall in the ethical spectrum? Ask in advance, all right? You always want to let your party know in advance if you would plan to, or if they would permit you to record them, all right? That is definitely an ethical line we want to recognize. Ask in advance. Good question. If interviewing is a skill that can be learned or learned, page 4, would this be a good practice to teach in high school, since our younger generations are not being taught how to communicate as well as they once were years ago? Were they once? I don't know. But should it be taught in high school? Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. This should be a skill we're picking up on at a younger age. Okay, chapter 2 of the same book, Interviewing for Journalists. If each type of interview requires a different approach, page 21, would it be beneficial to learn as much as possible about the background, the history, and so on of the interviewee prior to the interview itself? In other words, do your homework. Yes. All right. Yes. This, the extended research, the level of research you perform as an interviewer in advance is only going to enhance the exchange, the response, the content you are able to create. All right. It gives you a better picture to write better questions. It also shows interest on your part to them through your questions. Okay. And it also can lead you to asking smart questions. All right. If you're asking questions that are off-centered, they're out of left field, that show the interviewee you have no idea about them or their background, then they're going to close off and they're not going to give you as much of the kind of information you would ideally be seeking. That makes sense, right? You don't sort of ask a Hall of Fame rock and roller about, what are some of your songs, right? Or something like that. You would have, it appears this obscure album sounds more interesting. Could you talk about that? It's going to fall flat, okay? So people can sense if you're disingenuous, but also there are tell signs if you haven't done your research. Absolutely. This is why we're going to such an advanced prep mode in this course. In this specific course, we're trying to teach you all to integrate these skills in a repetitious fashion so that we are more likely to retain and thus practice them long term. All right. Skip that question. Let's move on to Scott Goodson, Uprising. If movements can spread like wildfire because of community technology and social media, what are some examples of what can put this fire out quicker than most? All right, so if it can spread like wildfire because of community technology, social media, what puts it out? What puts out the fire of a hot topic, of a spreadable media moment, or a social movement potentially? I'd say a couple of factors in the contemporary setting. All right, the 24-hour news cycle kills stories. It has the potential, the propensity to try to suffocate a story that might be more important than others, simply because there's so much content coming afterward. It's never ending. All right, it's that closed-ended narrative, and so the consumer, the audience, the reader, they feel exhausted to the point of they just simply have to move on, or they tune out or turn it off, right? And sometimes it's not so much they're turning off the TV as they're emotionally turning it off, right? They're tuning out with a lack of empathy, and that's a danger. The next sensational story coming down the pike. Oh my gosh, Flint, Michigan. I can't believe the water is poisoning all these people. I can't believe there seems to be like an ineptness of government officials, of whatever. Oh wait, what is this? What is this about my favorite sports team? Oh my goodness, we're just now paying monopoly money to this superstar who's our local celebrity. Oh, let's worry about that instead. Whoops, what happened to the social issue, right? So the next sensational story, the jaded audience, okay? This is why we're not giving credence to a show like InfoWars, but this is why we are experiencing an actual psychological or ideological information war at present, is because there's probably some let me come up with a term here, signal jammers, right? Rhetorical jammers, something with jam. There are people out there trying to suffocate messages that go against the grain of their, for lack of a better term, profitability. And so as a result, some important stories get buried over the stories that are going to generate more clicks or have a lot of followers or what have you. So it is a tricky time to be a journalist, right? It's challenging, and so that's where they pick up labels like I don't want to get off track, but jaded audiences can be a factor. Or when we say jaded audiences, when I use that term as a response, I'm thinking about the people even that I see on my feed, on my social media feeds. Let's say Facebook. Let's say they're conservative or ultra-conservative people. Somewhere along the way, someone has fed them information that the majority of media, mainstream media, is lying and out to get them, and it's that sub-definition of fake news that gets recirculated, and so they believe, well, they don't believe any story. So this is the people that are like, maybe you see someone in the third world suffering, dying, someone getting their head cut off, and then they come back and say, that's not real, that's produced. All right, so this is like the alpha and to omega. I say alpha, but it's more the omega level of cynicism that can be a negative impact of mass communication. All right, we'll put it that way. In one example, page 3, the statement is made, quote, ditch the rules of advertising, end quote. Does this mean advertising in general, the traditional advertising, or any form of advertising. So what is Goodson talking about here? This is more of a, and this is where Goodson's coming, he's trying to cash into. This is a former marketer, a former advertiser, or perhaps he no doubt still has his, feet in the water in a number of places, but this is someone saying they're critiquing that traditional form. So I'd most likely suggest to answer this question that it's a traditional form, like the traditional rules of advertising that are being critiqued here, right? Or those norms that suggest there's only one way, or here's the best way to do something. And so Goodson's encouraging us to look outside the box. He's saying, look at all of these companies that looked outside the box, and now they're so popular, they're so profitable, they're so immersive, they're so cultural changing that they rewrite the rules, they rewrite the norms. All right, so next couple of questions from Michael. Chapter 1, what is a movement? Why is it that people are seemingly drawn to be part of a movement? There are many factors. All right, connection, persuasion. All right, it could be passion. And we talked about passion in week 1. It'll continue to be a key term in the Goodson text. Many factors, right? It depends on if a message reaches its audience, if it's connecting with you. With the emergence of technology, how have movements been more effective to establish than before the emergence of, I assume maybe we're talking about digital technology, internet technology here. I think that's what we're talking about. Movements have greater, in the digital age, movements have greater reach, all right, and audience impact. So you can reach a larger audience further away, and if something has that viral potential, that virality to it, it can spark a cultural movement, or if it's urgent enough. It's all the factors. I was going to call it a magical formula, but that makes it sound like it's unobtainable. Rather, we need to be very strategic with our message in order to focus it in a way that it could spark a cultural movement. Also, connectivity, right? Connectivity is greater than is a predominant factor, and there's some other books. Maybe you've seen them lingering on the shelf in the background at the start of this course. Commodity activism is one that comes to mind. Protest, cultural movements, and something. And I can give us a stronger plug as we move along later in the course. As you can tell, they're not in the background at present. Why is the confessional approach to interviews preferable over the confrontational approach? Great question, simply because, once again, we're getting into the ethics of journalism and interviewing specifically. A confessional approach, by nature, is going to be more thoughtful. It's going to be more interpersonal. So you're attempting to establish more of a relational interaction with your interviewee, all right? And this is in contrast to a confrontational approach, which often can be exploitative, all right? Intentionally create, anytime we're stirring up emotion, this is one form of persuasion and one type of rhetorical strategy, like a pathos-driven strategy, and it's operating differently than ethos or logos, right? Than an ethical or a logical an appeal towards someone. So when we're thinking about confrontational approaches, there is that emotional response that could yield a less valid response from an individual. This is where courtroom dramas on TV and in movies fudge reality, because as if to stir someone up, they're going to explode and give you the truth, kind of like the Jack Nicholson in For a Few Good Men, For a Few Good Men. I can't handle that truth. Also, confrontational approach, less long-term investment in that individual. So when we're thinking about journalism and PR relations, you need to protect your sources by respecting your sources. Respect your source. You don't respect your source, you get confrontational with them, the less they will meet with you, the less information they will give you. So naturally, that confessional approach is a preferred strategy. We're just getting started, folks. We're gonna be back with part 2 of our week 1 asynchronous dialogue in progress.